There is a particular kind of silence that descends when someone does the one thing everyone else in a room was too frightened to do. Not the silence of shock, the silence of held breath, of 60 people suddenly realizing they had been waiting for exactly that moment without knowing it. That was the silence that swallowed the Meridian Grand's rooftop ballroom at 11:43 on a Thursday night in October. Bronagh Rayleigh stood there with an empty champagne flute on her tray and the words still warm in her throat, having just told the most powerful man in Canadian healthcare that he was wrong. She expected him to end her professionally before she made it back to the elevator. She did not expect him to turn around and look at her, like she was the only real thing in the room. She had been awake for 17 hours by then. The shift at Toronto General had run until 4, a 12-hour rotation that had stretched into 14, because the Friday afternoon trauma intake didn't care about her schedule, and she'd slept 45 minutes on the subway before arriving at the Meridian in her catering uniform, her hair pinned back too tightly, her left heel already complaining about the marble floors. Greta, who managed the event's staff and had known Bronagh since their first-year nursing practicum, had called her that morning in a voice that meant actual emergency, not the performative kind. 2 servers had bailed. The pay was $3.50 for 6 hours, cash at the end of the night. Bronagh had said yes before Greta finished the sentence. She needed $3.50 because Chiaran needed 14 more sessions of a targeted therapy that cost $4,600 each and was not covered by the provincial formulary because the clinical threshold guidelines had been written before the drug existed, which was the kind of administrative irony that kept Bronagh awake at 2 in the morning doing arithmetic that always came out the same. Her brother was 20 years old. He had a Maple Leafs poster above his bed and a laugh that sounded exactly like their mother's, high and sudden and startled, like something happy had ambushed him. He had been provisionally in remission for 4 months. She intended to keep him there. The gala was nominally a fundraiser for pediatric cancer research. In practice, it was an expensive room where hospital board members, pharmaceutical executives, and the category of donor whose name appeared on building wings exchanged the specific courtesies of people who needed things from each other. Bronagh circulated with a tray and kept her face neutral and told herself that 6 hours wasn't long. She was refilling glasses near the north windows when she registered the shift in the room's atmosphere. Not loudly, just the quiet reorganization of bodies, the ambient conversation thinning the way it does when attention has been pulled toward a single point. She tracked the drift toward the far end of the room. Dr. Kenneth Brewer, Chief Medical Officer at St. Michael's, was standing near the windows with his back almost to the glass. He was in his 60s, silver-haired, with the faintly rumpled quality of someone who spent more time in hospital corridors than ballrooms. Bronagh knew him by more than sight. 2 months earlier, Dr. Brewer had personally written a letter to the Provincial Drug Coverage Appeal Board on Ciaran's behalf. It had been 11 pages, meticulously cited, signed with his personal credentials, rather than the hospital's, so the liability sat entirely with him. The letter had not changed the outcome. But he had written it at 11 o'clock on a Saturday night because a nurse he had never met had left a message on his department line, explaining her brother's situation in 3 careful, unemotional paragraphs. He was now standing very still in front of Emmerich Vont, and whatever was being said was reducing him, sentence by sentence, in front of the people who held his professional future. Bronagh edged closer. "It is not a matter of contract terms, Kenneth." Vaughan's voice was low, carrying the particular authority of a man who never needed volume to be heard. "It is a matter of judgment, and your judgment, as you have demonstrated it, tells every person in this room something specific about your fitness for the role you currently occupy." Dr. Brewer's mouth pressed into a thin line. "The formulary committee made that recommendation independently. Your committee made a recommendation that cost 3 hospital networks their preferred pricing tier and positioned you as someone whose word carries a certain ceiling." Vaughn tilted his head, fractionally. "I imagine that's comforting to believe was worth it." The sound that moved through the room was not laughter. It was the nervous, ugly cousin of laughter. The sound of people who were afraid to laugh, but whose bodies had responded to the social cue of a man being diminished in front of the people who mattered most to his career. Bronagh had heard that sound in hospital break rooms, in admin meetings, in every space where one person held power and chose to demonstrate it publicly because the demonstration was the point. Her tray was steady. Her feet ached in specific catalogued ways she'd learned to set aside. She had 4 hours left and rent and Chiaran's next session and 12 other things that were more urgent than what was happening in front of her. Dr. Brewer began to speak, Vaughn continued over him, precisely, without raising his voice, in the way you might correct a calculation on a whiteboard. The compassionate use applications processed through your office have a 71% decline rate. That is not a policy outcome, Kenneth. That is a personal one. Bronner set her tray down on the nearest surface. She stepped forward. That's not accurate, she said. The silence was absolute and immediate. Emeric Vaughn turned. With something more disconcerting, a genuine arrested attention, as if his body had processed the interruption before his mind had categorized it. His eyes found her face. They were very dark, very still, and they stayed. I'm sorry, he said. The 71% figure. She held his gaze, which required more effort than she let show. Provincial average for compassionate use declines is 64. Dr. Brewer is within margin, and 3 of the cases his office approved in the past year came through the ERI work-in. I know those patients spine beat. Do you? The room did not breathe. Vaughn's expression had not changed. It was a face built for stillness. She could see that now, the face of a man who had spent a long time making sure nothing passed through it without his permission. But behind his eyes, something had shifted. Not anger, not pride. Something that looked, uncomfortably, like interest. You work in this building, he said. Different one. Same patients. A man to Vaughn's left, younger, with the alert stillness of someone whose job was to anticipate, moved forward. Vaughn raised one hand, barely a gesture. The man stopped. What is your name? Vaughn asked. She told him. He looked at her for a moment that lasted longer than moments usually do in rooms like that. Then he said quietly, Wait here. He turned from Dr. Brewer without another word. The crowd opened for him automatically, the way it always did for men who expected it to, and 2 people she hadn't noticed before fell into step behind him. The private elevator at the far end of the room accepted them and closed. Dr. Brewer exhaled. Bronner. I know, she said. You should. Miss Reilly. She turned. The younger man from Vaughn's side was standing 3 feet away, patient, very still. Mr. Vaughn would like a word, he said. The private room on the 42nd floor was a working space, a desk, a laptop, a standing lamp, floor-to-ceiling windows on 2 sides, showing Toronto spread out below in amber and white. The kind of room that communicated, without stating it, that the person using it had not taken a night fully off in years. Emeric Vaughn was at the window when Bronner arrived. He didn't turn immediately. The man who had escorted her, Howell, she would learn, 11 years with Vaughn, the kind of loyalty that couldn't be purchased because it had already been given, pulled the door closed and left them alone. How long have you been a nurse? Vaughn asked. 4 years. He turned. Without the crowd, he looked different. Not smaller, the opposite. The room was his in a way the ballroom hadn't been. He studied her with the same precise attention he'd given Dr. Brewer, but the quality was different. Less like an assessment, more like a problem he was genuinely engaging with. You know who I am, he said. I Googled you in the elevator. Something shifted in his expression, buried, but there. And? You've declined to comment on 3 class action suits involving specialty drug pricing. Your company holds supply agreements with 11 of the 14 major hospital networks in this province. Your philanthropic work is exclusively through organizations where you also hold a board seat. She held his eyes. So, I know who you are. The silence stretched. Rain had started against the glass, soft, consistent, the kind that settles in for the night. What you did downstairs wasn't calculated, he said finally. It was reckless. Dr. Brewer wrote an 11-page letter to the appeal board for my brother at 11 o'clock on a Saturday night. He didn't have to do that. She kept her voice even. You were going to finish his credibility in front of the exact people who determine his future because his committee made a call that cost you a pricing tier. She looked at him steadily. That's not a business consequence. That's a performance. Explain that, he said. You weren't angry at him. You don't look like someone who operates from anger. She studied his face. You were reminding the room what it looks like when you decide someone is expendable. You needed the audience there. Without them, it would have just been a correction. She paused. A real consequence doesn't need 60 witnesses. Vaughn was very still. You're not afraid of me, he said. I'm exhausted, Bronner said. When you're exhausted enough, afraid becomes one more thing to manage. He was quiet for a moment. Then your brother. What's the diagnosis? That's not why I'm here. It is, he said, because the compassionate use case Dr. Brewer approved from your unit 9 months ago. The 20-year-old, relapsed all first-year engineering student, I flagged that file myself. We absorbed the cost differential. He held her eyes. Is that Ciaran? The floor shifted slightly. "Yes," she said. He nodded once as if this confirmed something he hadn't been sure of. "Sit down," he said, "not an order, an offering." She sat. He pulled a chair across from her instead of returning to the desk. This she would think about later. The man who had just dismantled a senior physician in public was now sitting across from her like two people having a conversation. No desk between them, no performance. "What I said about Dr. Brewer's numbers," he said. "I knew it was inaccurate before you corrected me." She stared at him. "I was making a point, not an argument," he continued. "The renewal decision on our supply contract has been classified as final by his board. He has more influence there than I do. I was reminding him, and them, of a different kind of leverage." He met her eyes without flinching. "You were right. It was a performance, and it was a cheap one." The honesty of it was so unexpected she didn't have an immediate response. "I have a problem," he said. The problem, as he explained it, was structural. His father, Reginald Vaunt, who had built the company from a regional distribution network into what it was now, had died 8 months ago and left the board in a configuration designed to outlast any single executive. 3 of the 5 board seats were held by men who had been Reginald's contemporaries, and who viewed Emeric as an interim measure until a more manageable successor could be arranged. The pricing structures generating the class action scrutiny had been his father's. Emeric had been quietly trying to unwind them for 2 years. The board had blocked every attempt. "They need to believe I'm distracted," he said. "Focused elsewhere. The company is holding a board retreat in 3 weeks. Banff, a long weekend. Partners attend. I need someone beside me who won't say what they think I want to hear." He looked at her directly. "Someone who will tell me when I am being disproportionate." "You want me to come to Banff and pretend to be your partner?" Brunner said. The word carries specific weight in that room. "For a weekend?" "Yes. And in return?" He turned the laptop on the desk toward her. A number, not presented with ceremony, just there the way a fact is there. It was enough to cover Sieran's remaining 14 sessions and leave a margin she had stopped letting herself imagine. She looked at it for a long time. "This doesn't fix the system," she said. "No," he agreed. "The drugs my brother needs shouldn't cost what they cost. The coverage framework shouldn't work the way it works. A weekend in the mountains doesn't change that." "No," he said again. He let her think. He didn't fill the silence with reassurance or persuasion, which she'd noticed, and which she was not sure how to categorize. "But it is what I can offer tonight." She thought about the math she'd been doing for 8 months. "If I do this," she said, "I won't be quiet when you're wrong. I told you, that's the point." And Sieran's treatment. "Covered by Friday," he said, "regardless of your answer. I cleared the account this afternoon when Howell pulled your employment file." He watched her face. "Before you interpret that as pressure, I did it because I should have done it 11 months ago when the appeal first came through. I didn't see it. The accounting department routed it to pricing review before it reached my desk. That's a failure I own." She believed him. She wasn't sure she should, but she did. She said yes. Banff in October was the kind of beautiful that felt faintly aggressive, the mountains indifferent and enormous. The sky a color that had no equivalent anywhere else. The retreat was held at a private lodge the Vaunt Group had used for a decade. The kind of place that communicated, without stating it, that the people who stayed there did not discuss cost. Bronner had been given 48 hours' notice, a card she used for exactly 3 items she could actually move in, and a briefing from Howell on the key players. Aubrey Whitshaw, 68, board chair, who had loved Reginald Vaunt like a brother, and who regarded Emeric with the particular wariness of a man watching someone he'd underestimated. Sandra, the CFO, loyal to the restructuring but politically cautious. And Haddon Alton, the board member who had been quietly recruiting Emeric's replacement for 6 months, while attending every board meeting and smiling at everything. Emeric was different in Banff. Not warmer, that wasn't the right word, more exposed. The performance he maintained in the city required a specific kind of audience, and without one, he defaulted into something quieter. Over dinner on the first night, not the board dinner, a brief meal in a small room off the main lodge, he asked her what her ER shifts were actually like. She told him about a Tuesday 2 weeks earlier, 9 patients in 4 hours, including a 14-year-old brought in by 2 friends who were also clearly high and terrified, and trying very hard to hold each other together in the waiting room. Vaunt listened without offering an interpretation. "You think about them afterward," he said. "Everyone does," she said. "They don't, actually." He turned his glass on the table. "I've funded enough hospital initiatives to sit through enough presentations. Most people working in high-volume care learn to compartmentalize within the first 2 years. You haven't. She thought about telling him he was wrong. She didn't. The board dinner on the second night was long, candlelit, the kind of wine that came with numbers instead of names. Bronagh sat beside Emeric and learned quickly that Aubrey Whitshaw was not a subtle man. "You're not from the industry," Whitshaw said to her between the salad and the entree. He'd been drinking steadily for 2 hours in a way that hadn't softened him at all, only made him more direct. "Emergency nursing," Bronagh said. He looked at Emeric. "Interesting choice." Back to her. "How did you two meet?" Emeric had told her, "Tell the truth where you can. The story doesn't need to be elaborate. It needs to be consistent." "He was publicly misrepresenting someone I respect," Bronagh said. "I corrected him." Whitshaw stared at her, then a genuine laugh, the first real thing she'd heard from him all evening. "Did he?" "Yes." "And he didn't." He waved a hand. "He offered me a chair and listened," Bronagh said, "which I'll admit I wasn't expecting." Whitshaw looked at Emeric with an expression she couldn't fully pass, somewhere between reassessment and something that looked almost like relief. Emeric held the gaze, revealing nothing. By the end of the dinner, she understood that something had shifted. Whitshaw was watching Emeric differently, as if a man he'd filed under efficient but limited might in fact be more complicated than that. Haddon Alton caught her alone near the bar after. He was younger than she'd expected. Mid-40s, charming in the specific way of someone who had spent years practicing charm as a professional instrument. He offered to get her a drink. She declined. He smiled with the warmth of a door left open. "He'll move on," Alton said pleasantly. 6 months, maybe less. You're genuine, which is interesting. Interesting doesn't sustain in this world." He tilted his head. "I could arrange something considerably more stable for you. You'd never need to cover a night shift again." Bronagh looked at him. She thought about what 350 for 6 hours felt like. She thought about the 45 minutes of sleep on the subway. She thought about Ciaran's laugh and the way it still startled her sometimes, even now how much it sounded like their mother. "I'm going to tell him you said that," she said. "Word for word, tonight." Alton's smile held. "I'd expect nothing less," he said, and walked away. She found Emeric by the window overlooking the dark mountain range. She told him, exactly as she'd promised. He was very still while she spoke. When she finished, he said, "Alton sits on the Internal Compassionate Use Review Committee at the company level." She waited. "He was on the committee when your brother's application was filed," Vaughn said. His voice was carefully even in the way it got when something under it was not. "He didn't block it deliberately. You weren't relevant to him at that point." No one in that room was relevant to him. The application was declined on cost grounds and routed to archive. He paused. "That is what I find I cannot locate a comfortable relationship with." The cold that moved through her chest was slow and specific. "Win the vote," she said finally. He looked at her. "Whatever you have to do to win that vote," she said, "win it, and then fix the committee." For a moment, something crossed his face that was not quite a smile, but was closer to one than anything she'd seen from him. "You're very straightforward," he said. "I'm very tired," she said. "It amounts to the same thing." The vote came 6 weeks later, 3-2. Whitshaw's was the deciding seat. Bronagh was not in the room when it happened. She was in the ER, covering a shift she'd traded for, 17 hours into her day when her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. 3-V. She sat down on the bench outside triage and pressed the heel of her hand against her sternum and breathed. Ciaran's most recent scan had come back clean, not provisionally, not tentatively. His oncologist had used the phrase durable remission with the careful joy of someone who doesn't want to oversell what could still shift. Bronagh had cried in the hospital parking lot for 11 minutes and then gone back inside. She had not expected to hear from Emeric Vaughn again after Banff. The arrangement had been a weekend. The weekend was finished. He was many things, but he was not vague. If there had been a further offer, he would have made it explicitly, clearly, without decorative language. He appeared at Toronto General at 8:30 on a Friday evening. She came out of the staff entrance in her scrubs and found him in the corridor, in a coat that was clearly not designed for the plastic chairs in the waiting area, standing up when he saw her. "I'd like to offer you a role," he said. She stared at him. Her coffee cup had been empty for 3 hours. What kind of role? "Patient advocacy director." He said it without preamble. "It doesn't exist yet. Sandra and I have been restructuring the compassionate use review process so that it runs through an independent clinical advocate, someone who reports outside the pricing committee, who cannot be overruled by cost analysis alone, Someone who has actually worked in an emergency room. He held her eyes. I'd like it to be you. I'm a nurse, she said. I know what you are. No flinching. The role requires you to maintain your nursing registration. That's the entire point. It has to be held by someone who has not left clinical practice. Someone who knows what it looks like when a system fails the person standing in front of it. He paused. Your brother's case won't be the last to fall through a gap I didn't know existed. I'd like to close those gaps. I need someone who will tell me when I'm missing one. Bronnar looked at him for a long moment. The ER hummed around them, the overhead announcements, the distant sound of a child crying, the particular ambient noise of a building full of people in the middle of the worst days of their lives. What happened to Alton, she said. He resigned last week. And Whitshaw? Retired, effective January, his choice. A pause. Faubury left Banff, he told me I should hold on to you, his words. She let out a breath that came from somewhere she hadn't known she was holding. This isn't how systems change, she said. One person in one company changing one committee, that's not reform. That's a patch. Yes, he agreed, but a patch is where it starts. He looked at her, and she saw something in his face that she hadn't seen there before. The precise, guarded attention was still there, but the performance underneath it was gone. Just a man standing in a hospital corridor at the end of a long week, saying what he actually meant. I have spent a very long time building structures I could defend technically, but could not justify to someone like you. I find I'm no longer comfortable with that. She thought about the woman who had stood in a ballroom in an ill-fitting uniform with a champagne tray, and said, in a voice steadier than she had any right to produce, "That's not accurate." She thought about the specific silence that had followed, not the silence of shock. The silence of 60 people realizing someone had finally said the thing. She thought about Ciaran's laugh. She thought about their mother. You should know, she said, that if I take this role, I am going to be genuinely difficult. The corner of Emmerich Vaughant's mouth moved, not a smile exactly, the beginning of one. Yes, he said, I'm counting on it. She held out her hand. He took it, and he held it 1/2 second past the length a handshake requires, and he looked at her the way a man looks at something he has only just understood he has been looking for. From a 6-hour catering shift on a Thursday night to the first patient advocacy chair in the company's history. Bronnar Rayleigh had not waited to be found or chosen or rescued. She had simply refused to stay quiet in a room that expected her to, and in a world built almost entirely on performance, it turned out the most dangerous person in any room was the one who meant exactly what she said. If you loved Bronnar's story, smash that like button and subscribe to Love Chief for more stories about ordinary people who refuse to stay small. And tell us in the comments, if Haddon Alton had offered you the money and the exit, would you have taken it, or would you have stayed?